This is really exciting for me because I had the unique pleasure of shadowing Rob on the set of Haven many years ago, before I had done any TV directing. I think I had a few MOWs under my belt. And it was the only time I ever got to shadow a director and got to really see someone at that high level, someone who'd been directing for so long, executing the craft at that level. And it was really, really informative. I learned a huge amount watching him direct from the shadows, just kind of seeing seeing the madness unfold. And it was really informative. So I know everyone's going to learn a lot. For those of you who aren't familiar with Rob's work, he's really done everything, and he's been doing it for a really long time. He started out in the world of commercials, just like I did, and really became prolific in that world. He's got a great story about how he kind of got started. Eventually, he won the Clio Award when he was 29 and became the first recipient of the DGA's Best Commercial Director Award in 1980. He's done movies, including Fire in the Sky, which is one of my favorite sci-fi films of all time. Hopefully everyone here has seen that, based on the incredible true story of actual alien presence amongst us. He's done incredible miniseries, including Titanic, not the one with James Cameron, but the other one that's even better with George C. Scott and Catherine Zeta-Jones. He's worked with incredible actors, and he's done a huge amount of TV, which is a lot what we're going to talk about today, including doing lots of pilots. He did the pilot for Killer Instinct, for Dead Zone, and others. And he's done a lot of TV here in BC. And in Canada. One of my favorite shows, The Expanse, he's worked on, which is really cool. He did Falling Skies, Haven, like I said, Arctic Air, which shot here, Criminal Minds, Lost Girl, Republic of Doyle, Eureka, Dexter, and you may have heard of X-Files. He worked on X-Files, and was even nominated for a DGC award for The Expanse. And so we're very, very honored to have Rob be one of our members at the DGC and one of our most veteran members, and here to share his wisdom on both the good and the bad and of the trenches of directing. So welcome, Rob.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm a proud resident of Vancouver and a proud member of the DGC, BC Local. And I actually started, the first time I ever shot in Canada in my career was in 1996 when I came out to do the miniseries Titanic with Catherine Zeta-Jones and George C. Scott. And I fell in love with Vancouver at that time. But I was shooting as an American, as a DGA member for CBS. So it was really American product being shot in Canada. In 2008, I then applied, actually in 2007, I applied for my permanent resident card, which I got in 2008. And then
I remember when we met, that's what was just happening. Yeah.
And so that's when I became a Canadian director, and I started doing almost exclusively Canadian content for the intervening years. Worked as a DGC director, I would say probably about 97, 99% of the time since 2008. And I moved to Toronto for a while and directed a lot of shows out of Toronto. Newfoundland, I did Republic of Doyle. Nova Scotia, I did 4 seasons of Haven. So I pretty much shot across the country. And now in 2018, I moved back to Vancouver and moved my production center back to DGC BC.
Yeah.
And I'm delighted to, currently I am stranded in the United States because I was down here for medical reasons and then got it commandeered into quarantine land. You know, and I have been unable to return. Unfortunately, it was right at the moment that I had just signed on to do a new Netflix show. And I went and got one of the N95 masks. This is really, really early on. And they just said not even have to wear a mask. And I went, if I'm going to get on an airplane, this thing's starting to break out all over the world. I have to go to Vancouver and shoot this Netflix show, but I got to stay safe. So,
yeah, I was in the same boat. I bought a bunch of N95s in like February because I was like, I've got to be on planes, but that all ended. So you told me in 2008, sort of, because I was doing commercials as well, sort of how you got your start. It was in commercials, right? You started as an editor, is that right? If I remember
Correct.
correctly?
Yeah, correct. I started actually as an assistant editor. And I was the assistant editor to, at that time, commercial production companies had in-house editorial. They did their own, directors had their own editors in their own establishments. They didn't have editorial services, as it were. And so I worked for a company, a small company, a couple of directors, as the assistant, a very indignant assistant. I couldn't fathom why I had to run to the lab during lunch and things like that. And in fact, it's a funny story is that like the first day on the job, I was hired by like a friend of mine that lived in an apartment below me. So we were like buddies. And he said, well, I'm going
And how
out to
old were you? I remember you were in your early 20s, right?
I think I was 21, 22.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm going out to lunch with the client, and you run out to the lab and pick up the dailies. I went, wait a second, who do I have lunch with? He went, you'll pick up lunch on the way. I mean, it's just go to the lab and pick up the dailies. I was like so insulted that I had to work through lunch that I went and I brought my receipt from McDonald's or whatever it was. I brought it to the accountant who reimbursed me for it because I had to work through lunch. Okay, so that policy of reimbursing people through lunch grew to when I owned my own company, Harmony Pictures, which had 16 directors and a couple hundred employees. That policy was still in place and was bankrupting me. Basically initiated the policy that turned around to bankrupt me. So,
well,
anyway.
at least you got lunch out of it. And then, so talk to me about, what I think what's really unique about your story is from your perspective now, you can really tell, I think, lots of different experiences, which is you got your breaks as a director when you were very young, just like I did. When I got my first breaks, I was 22 and had to go through that experience of being sort of a wonderkin, but being younger than anyone wanted to give you respect, all the way to now where you've probably had many ups and downs through your career. So talk to me about your first breaks as a young director, and then also sort of the struggles of being a young director.
Exactly as you put it. It's like Rodney Dangerfield, can't get no respect. And you just had to barrel your way in. You just had to work with like a level of self-confidence that I don't know where it came from in me, but it's just, I had it. And I started assistant editor. That company broke up. The editor I was working for, who was my best friend, he was like a rat scuttling the ship. He's like, oh, this thing's sinking. I'm going to go get a job somewhere else. So I was left behind to clean up the mess, like the vaults and all the things that had to be mailed out with the dissolution of this company. And in the meanwhile, they opened up a new company, asked me if I would like to be the editor of that company. And I went, okay. So I was like 22 when I won my first Cannes Film Festival award for editorial and commercials, and for a 7-Up commercial. And then what happened was I started directing. I got a shot to direct, which was because there was only one director. It was a team that was in the original company. They split up, and I went with one of them. That guy happened to have like a world-class, he's dead now, so I don't want to speak ill of him, but he had like a world-class ego. So when they wanted to, he could only do so much work. He was very popular. And when he was booked up, they had to send the work to some other company, and it's called an off-sell. His partner, the producer partner, said, let's bring in another director so that we keep that work. And if you can't do it, we'll give it to someone else and we'll make the money off of that person. But his ego was so big, they couldn't bring in another big name director. So the producer convinced him, what about you being, Rob Lieberman being your protege? And he kind of liked that idea, Rob Lieberman being my protege. So I became his protege. But basically what it was is when he couldn't do the job, when his calendar was punched, then they said, hi, how about this young guy I have over here? He's pretty good too. Look at his reel. And they would show my editorial reel initially. And they would give me a job. But he was very reluctant to be my mentor.
Did he teach you anything? Did he teach you any critical thing?
he taught me a number of things, but the main lesson I learned from him was this story. On my very first commercial, I'm 21 years old. I'm from Buffalo, New York. Never dreamed I was going to be. I was like a distant dream to be a director. And I'm driving in a car to a set to direct my first commercial at 21 for Kraft cheese slices. They're actually entitled Kraft Food Cheese Slices because it's cheese food, not cheese. Okay. At any rate, I'm driving there. I get to the set, and in my mind, I'm going to make this like really spectacular commercial. It's like some bullshitty kind of selling cheese. You know? It's about a couple and whatever it was. So I'm going to do something really elaborate with it, and I say I'm going to do it as a one. I'll do it as the whole commercial as a one. That'll be really innovative. So I block it out. I spend like half the day blocking it out with the camera and all of that. There's 2 actors. Block the whole thing out. Finally, it comes time to shoot it. And I say action, and this thing works like clockwork. The door opens, the guy comes in, the camera moves, they come over to the counter, they have a conversation, they sit down at the table. It's all in a oneer, and it just went off the very first take one, flawlessly, and I'm like delighted, I'm besides myself. And this particular director, my mentor, came up to me and he very quietly in my ear, he said, hey, Rob, do you think you should say something? And I thought, this is my first time directing. I wasn't sure what I was. I said, like what? He said, like, cut!
Very important.
That was my first big lesson. That's what he shared with me. Make sure you cut.
So tell me, like, we've talked before on these talks a little bit about how the commercial world works, where it's unlike the other part of the industry where you're sort of repped by a commercial house, and the commercial house reps directors and goes, you know, to the agencies and gets jobs. But you know, I asked you a question back then. You know, you've done thousands of commercials, some of them very, very famous. You know, and I would pull my teeth all year to get 1 or 2. What was sort of your secret to getting that many commercials? Like what, you know, because you have to fight for those jobs. You have to pitch for them. You have to show a vision. You have to convince them to choose you. So what led you doing to such a prolific amount of commercials?
Well, it's all niche work, right? I mean, everybody is categorized. The joke in the commercial business is if somebody was doing a comedy strawberry commercial, you had to send them your comedy strawberry reel. You know, let's see all the other comedy strawberry things you've done. So I was really, I loved my niche because everybody was kind of like very graphic or very funny or very whatever. And they label you. And I was labeled a storyteller. And I loved that label. So I ended up doing little movies. And everything I did had heart to it. it wasn't just spokesman standing there with a product. I would try to build into, like really dig into relationships between sisters, between brothers. I did over 400 commercials for McDonald's alone. So
wow. I did one.
It's, you know, I mean, they paid the bills. I mean, my last kid just graduated from college of 5. So thank you, McDonald's. In the process of that, I also had another niche, and that was directing children, because I started as a child actor in Buffalo, if you can believe it. There wasn't a lot of child acting to be done in Buffalo, but I did some of it. And so I just became a big draw for the guy who owned the company. His main sphere of influence was Chicago advertising, not New York advertising. And Chicago advertising is the breadbasket advertising. So it really relied at that time on humanity and relationships and heart. And, you know, so I did 2-minute Hallmark commercials and 2.5-minute Hallmark commercials that all won awards and were, you know, but for me, they were satisfying because I was making like these mini movies. They had beginning, middles, and ends. And
yeah. Well, before we go on to your movie work, you told me a piece of advice. I don't know if you still stand by this advice, but it always stuck with me ever since, which is I asked you, like, you know, I keep not getting these commercials. Like, what's the thing? And at the time you told me, Just tell them whatever they want to get the job and then change everything. Don't try and change it all before you get the job because they won't hire you.
No, you tell them what they want to hear, not, you know, and then what you do, then my next policy is this is my slogan, which is, do you want it your way or do you need to be right? Because if you need to be right, you're probably not going to get it your way. But if you're willing to have them believe it's their way, you can get them to do it your way. Okay.
Right. Yeah, it's all about framing it.
You know, it's like a lot of directors want to impose that, you know, but I know the right way of doing it. That's the wrong way of doing it. And they'll dig in on that. But if you say, I understand what you're saying, but what if we did it your way and we just did a little bit like this and like that, and it ended up the director's way. So agency people are an interesting breed of humanity. The greatest number of them are frustrated in whatever job they are. They're copywriters who wanted to be novelists. They're art directors who wanted to be painters. They're very frustrated folks. And I've worked with some lovely, don't get me wrong, some wonderful advertising people, all three of them. And, but it's been challenging. It was challenging, especially, you know, what I call supervision, you know, and I'm sure all the directors on this call understand what it's like to be supervised. You know, like we know that Marty Scorsese and Steven Spielberg are not supervised. They get to do what they want, when they want it, how they want to do it, basically. But everywhere else, you've got this heavy supervision, and never more supervised than in advertising. They literally would set up bleachers for the advertising agency folks. And I would have to fight to have them just send one person down with an opinion because they all had an opinion. So,
And how did you survive that? How do you survive being supervised? I mean, I'm sure that's something that's evolved through your whole career.
Well, it comes down to a simple thing for me. And the simple thing for me is I've been most of my life a director for hire. I'm not an auteur. I've rewritten many of the scripts that I've directed, but it wasn't my material to begin with. So it's not really, so I was a hired hand basically on a lot of levels, never more so than in commercials. And if you just have the attitude that it really isn't yours, it's theirs, and you're there to do the best job for them. And so I never fought them heavily. I would argue with them, of course, when I thought they were wrong, but ultimately I was there to make them look good. And it works that way in television as well. It's like I always assure the creator of the show and the writers that I'm working with, I'm here to do your bidding. I want this show to make you happy and help you. In the process, I'll do the best work I can do.
I remember when I was watching you direct, you may not remember this detail, but it stuck with me for a long time and changed the way I shot for a long time. There was the script called for someone being on the floor, and I think you'd had conversations with them about changing it, but then you were there on the room and you're like, you literally are asking me to point the camera into a white floor. Like there's no, can they just lean against the counter? Can they be against the wall? Can they, like, there's nothing about being on the floor that is cinematic. But you know, the writer on set didn't want to change it because the showrunner said he's on the floor, and seeing you navigate that. And also just from that point on, every script I ever looked, whenever there was anyone on the floor, I remembered, oh, Rob Lieberman told me never on the floor. There's nothing cinematic about being on the floor. And you were able to get them to change.
That's true of stunt people. Stunt people always want the fight to be on the floor. They're always, and I'm going, I can't get any decent angles with stuff on the floor. You're either shooting into the floor or I got to put them up on a platform and put a camera below them to shoot the ceiling. So generally speaking, I try to find other ways of getting people on couches.
Yeah. So talk to me about you kind of curated a brand, which was a storyteller who does commercials. But then, like many filmmakers, you probably wanted to be a filmmaker doing films. But how did you break out of the stigma of being a commercial guy who does 30 seconds of content or a minute of content to doing 90 minutes? Like, how did that rebranding happen, and what did you learn through that process?
It took a number of years. I tried to get into television, episodic television. You couldn't get in without experience, as you well know, as we all well know. So it's the catch-22. So where do I get the experience so I can get in? Because every place I go to get experience, they say you got to have experience. So I realized that was a kind of a dead end. I went on a bunch of meetings and it just was a dead end. But at that time, there was a program that was called, that Michael Eisner had created under his tutorship at ABC, called ABC's After School Specials. And they were hour-long shows, basically themed for children and post-school children, kids coming home from school, to try to get that audience and sell them cornflakes or something. And I probably did the commercial for the cornflakes. Anyways, by the way, I did have a series. I think it was Titanic. No, it was a Hallmark. It was a Hallmark. I did a Hallmark. It was Titanic. It was Titanic. Hallmark did Titanic. And the commercials were all mine as well. It was like the programming and then the commercial, then the programming, then the commercial. At any rate, ABC After School Specials were non-union gigs, and they were, the way they kept the cost down is ABC would buy them finished. So they would give you the money, you'd go away, whatever the production company was, would go away, and they'd come back with a finished, titled, mixed, color-corrected, finished product. So I saw that and I went, well, that might be a way of getting in. So then I checked out who's all supplying these after-school specials to ABC. And there was a company called, I went to all of them, by the way. And then I ended up at one called Martin Tozzi Productions. He's passed away as well. And I convinced him with my commercial reel to give me a shot, and they paid nothing. They shot on 16 millimeter just to show you. I mean, it was like, okay, I'm going to tell you what the budget was. And so everybody just stay seated for a moment. Okay, finished with the titles, ready to air, mixed, color corrected, $200,000. 1 hour of film. You can imagine what my paycheck was. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, but it was.
But it got you in the door, and you were able to get around the catch-22.
Yeah, absolutely. So what happened is I did the first one. They liked the first one. I did a second one. They liked the second one. Now I had 2 hours of television under my belt. I took those 2 hours of television and got myself a 2-hour movie of the week for ABC, I think. And it was called the Autobiography of G. Gordon Liddy, who was the Darth Vader of the Nixon administration, played by Robert Conrad, who just died, which was a nightmare. He was a nightmare to work with. I mean, literally a nightmare. I still wake up with like cold sweats thinking about it. At any rate, I was able to do that film, and that got me a second television movie called Fighting Back: The Story of Rocky Bleier. For a while there, it looked like I would only do films with 2 titles, but that was about a quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers who had gone to Vietnam, got his foot blown to shreds, said they would never come back, but Art Rooney worked, and he won 4 Super Bowl rings. So he was a terrific guy, great story, played by Robert Urich, who was Dan Tana, passed away, lovely guy. And so those things, which were, now I had 2 television movies, I showed to John Voight and got my first feature table for 5 in 1981. And so that's—
Before we jump into that, because I know the story behind that, it's a great story. I just want to remind people that they can raise their hand if they want to come on screen and ask Rob a question, or they can write, if you're too shy or you haven't had a shower yet, you can write your question down in the Q&A section, and we'll answer it there. So I know Table for 5 was a big break for you. That was like movie star, game changer, you're the hottest director in town moment.
Absolutely.
Tell me about the pressure of that, or kind of what was going through your head in that moment, and what was kind of, how did you try and make that a success, and what was the lessons you learned making that movie?
Well, let me start out by saying, first of all, it was starred John Voight, who was right off his Academy Award-winning performance in Coming Home. And he had interviewed 30 directors for the job. And what he said to me, which was, I was pretty tickled by, he said, you know, I interviewed a director a few years back, and I went against my better judgment and didn't hire him. You remind me of him. I'm not going to make that mistake twice. And that director was Spielberg.
Wow.
So yeah, so I was honored. And then so now I get this job, and for those who don't know what the film's about, it's about a divorced father who comes back into the life of his children, and then a tragic thing happens, and he's stuck with the three kids. And it becomes a joust between him and the stepfather for who's going to get the custody of the kids. Stepfather's played by an actor named Richard Crenna, who is a pretty famous actor back in the day. And it was not just my first feature, it was a first feature that went all around the world. We shot for 60 days. I shot in Greece and Rome and Genoa and in Egypt, and I mean, everywhere, Malta. It was an amazing experience. It was so heady to have gone from where I had come from in Buffalo, and then these few years later, I'm now realizing my absolute dream.
And how old were you then?
Let me see. I was probably, what did I say? It was 80. So I was about 30, somewhere approaching 30.
Still pretty young for that level of work.
But you have to understand, this was such a part of my, as it is for everybody on this call, I'm sure, such a part of your dream, that sitting in Buffalo, New York, I would actually do calculations of like, at what age did directors peak? What age did Billy Wilder do his best work? You know, it's like, and so it turns out that most directors break kind of the middle 30s, become feature film directors. It takes you about how much time to work your way into the mainstream to do it. At any rate, so I got the job. I go to the office, and so the producer, Robert Chaffel and John Voight, say, well, who would you like to shoot this for you? And I said, okay, there's a DP that I work with all the time in commercials. He's really fantastic. They stopped me. They went, no. You're in a different place now. Who in the world would you like to shoot this? And I went, Sven Nykvist. And about 15 minutes later, they went, Mr. Nykvist on line 4. And that was Ingmar Bergman's cinematographer. And I was like, okay. And this guy gets on the phone. He's busy doing another Bergman piece, so he can't do it. And then the next one was, I'm forgetting his name, but it's the cinematographer who shot Raging Bull. Raging Bull had just come out, and I thought that was the greatest piece of cinema I'd ever seen. And so I had a meeting with him, and he agreed to do it till he heard who the production manager was, and he said, no, thank you. So he backed out. That was the end of him. And so I had to end up with Vilmos Zsigmond, 2-time Academy Award winner Vilmos Zsigmond. And what the other thing that I had clocked, because I'm so anally retentive, is that I would read the reviews in Variety all the time of films. And any film that was like an important film, you would recognize all the names in it. It would be Edith Head did the wardrobe. It would be every single person would be a notable. So I decided that when I make my first film, the only name people will not know in the review is mine. So that I made a determination. So the production designer of Table for Five was Robert Boyle. We probably don't know who Robert Boyle is. He was Alfred Hitchcock's production designer.
Heard of him.
North by Northwest and Vertigo and the Birds. Okay, that was my production designer. Vilmos Zsigmond, who won the Academy Award for, which was, what was the one with the Western, the Western that has all the snow in it, that has Warren Beatty in it.
Oh, right. Yeah, I forget. But what I'm really curious about is like, because as I've noticed I went from a $1 million movie to a $17 million movie, thinking, well, this is gonna be easy. We got tons of time and money. But what I was not prepared for was the level of politics and egos that I was walking into. Now, the art department budget was $3 million, 3 times the budget of my movie. And the people that were there had much bigger, more experience and sort of a position where they were very strong people and I was the newcomer. So what was it like navigating that where you're sort of the new kid and everyone else has Oscars on their shelves?
Someone just told us, McCabe and Mrs. Miller.
Perfect.
Thank you. It was daunting at times, but you just keep your eye on the prize. I mean, I figured, first of all, John Voight voted full-throatedly for me and told me I get final cut. I was a first-time director. I got final cut because he said to me, I get final cut and I'm giving it to you. So
Wow.
to know that the star of the show is your backstop gave me a great deal of confidence. And then all the people I hired, they embraced what I was doing, and they respected me. I had a trouble with my AD. He was a industry heavy-duty AD. His name was Newt Arnold. Had done a lot of big films, and he kind of looked down his nose at me like, "What's this young upstart doing here?" And eventually, we were shooting a scene at sunset at the Sphinx with Vilmos Zsigmond and all his cameras.
The Sphinx.
Sphinx. And and this is the moment in the film I chose to make this the backdrop when John Voight informs these three children that their mother was killed in a car accident. So it's an amazingly somber moment, and I've got to get performances out of like an 8-year-old boy, a 10-year-old girl, and a 13-year-old boy. And it's going to be rough. So when you work with John, luckily I had done all these hundreds of commercials with children. You have to keep a quiet set. You have to keep it very safe so that children feel safe to be able to explore their feelings. And so I was in the busy. Meanwhile, it's the sun's setting, and this guy Newt Arnold comes to me and says, "When are you gonna be done?" I went, "What do you mean? When am I gonna be done? I'm gonna be done when I'm done. I'm working with these actors right now." And then I thought, why do you need to know when I'm gonna be done? When the sun's down, we'll be out of light. And he said, "Never mind." And I went, "Wait a second. Am I in like school trouble with these kids?" And he went, "Yeah, you're in school trouble with these kids." I said, "Well, why am I in school trouble with these kids?" And he starts screaming on the top of his lungs at me. And I just look at him and I went, "Let's take a walk." And we walked all the way down this Egyptian street, got into a car. And as I looked past him down the street, the entire crew was looking around the corner at this car that was bouncing because I was screaming so loud in it. And when I came out, the producers took me aside and they went, "If you'd like to have him replaced, we can have an AD on a plane to Egypt by tomorrow." And I said, "No, I think he'll mind his P's and Q's from now on in." And he did.
Yeah.
He came to me the next day and he said, "Listen, I know you want me fired. Just tell me, I'll work till my replacement comes. I'll take care of you till my replacement comes." I said, "If I fire you, you'll be the first to know."
And so what if there was one big lesson you learned making that movie, what was it?
The big lesson I learned making that movie is the same lesson that I would tell to every director, which is emotions and feelings will not solve problems. And I believe that the motion picture business travels on what I call as a catastrophic standard. You just move from one catastrophe to the next catastrophe. It's just, that's the standard by which you mark a film.
Yeah.
And as you're always going to be disappointed. You're always going to be disappointed. You're going to walk on the set and you ask for it in blue and it's there in red. You say, "Well, I said blue." And they say, "Well, blue wasn't available." "Well, you could have told me. I would have wanted green." Okay, but those people are going to make decisions for you and make the wrong decisions all the time. There's a Jim Cameron of doing business, which is you immediately decimate that human beings to a pile of dust, which doesn't save your film or fix anything in your film. Or you say, "What can I do to fix this problem?" And decimating that person personally does not fix that problem. So what you have to do is be a problem solver, not a tyrant, not a person. Of course, guys like Fincher and myself, and probably most of the directors on this call, when you have an idea, you want it executed the way you want it executed. And you're going to be disappointed because it's not going to be exactly the way you want it executed. Sometimes it's major disappointments. I walked in, an entire set was painted the wrong color. And I went, "I'm not shooting it. we're repainting it. I'm sorry. It's just not the color. I'm not shooting a set. So sometimes you get away with that. Sometimes you don't get away with that.
Probably that was on a movie, not a TV show. I'd imagine.
It's not a pilot.
Pilot, yeah.
A movie.
Yeah. So we only have a certain amount of time, but I do want to go on to Fire in the Sky. Is there a kind of, that's such an amazing movie, and lots of people, it's really one of the sci-fi icons. Was there a lesson you learned making that movie, something that that you were surprised by or you took with you for the rest of your career?
Well, I was committed to making a film that was as viscerally convincing as I could make it. That was the commitment. I had seen Schreiber's Communion, and I thought, that's a load of baloney. I mean, it just looked like baloney. Bunch of midgets running around. I mean, that's not politically correct. Bunch of little people running around. I mean, it just looked stupid to me. And I went, I can't do that. Then I read Travis Walton's book, and he claims that read the book. He claims that the aliens were 7 foot tall Aryan types with shoulder length blonde hair, with chest plates, with and I was like, I can't have Dolph Lundgren play right out of this place. So I really went out of my way to try to create things that were unexplainable, that were inexplicable, so that you would, so the alien that we designed with the help of ILM and Nilo Rodas Ramirez had to be smaller than a person. It could not be inhabited by a human being. I didn't want it to be. This is pre-CGI. It's so pre-CGI that when I was doing this sequence at ILM, which by the way, the whole movie shot in 7 weeks, and that 12 minutes shot in another 7 weeks. It's so early that there was a building on their campus in San Rafael, California, that was off limits, no trespassing. And inside that building, they were doing the very first creature animation for Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
So I had no CGI. There was no CGI to be done. So I had to do everything practical, and I wanted it to be, so they became puppets. They were puppets. In some scenes, they were little girls and wide shots and stuff, little ballerinas. But in most of it, they're puppets operated by 3 guys with like 18 servos or something like that. Each one had 3 servos per hand, so they could move the face around, they could move the neck, they could do all kinds of things with this thing. And then someone puppeteered the mouth, and it was. But to do everything practical was the name of the game. And I said, and Nilo would go to ILM and he said he wants a playground, because the thing up until that time, sci-fi would be boarded. Right? Everything gets boarded in our business. So it was boarded. And then the art department would recreate that board. It would be a still picture of a guy standing in front of some tunnel or something, whatever it is. And I went, no, I want to shoot this handheld. I want to be able to swing the camera anywhere and let the audience see that we're really here. It's really behind me, it's around me, not just in that direction and in that direction. So it was a very elaborate set. For those of you who have not seen the film, he wakes up on a ship, and that ship is kind of shaped, the compartment he's in is like a huge silo. It's a big, tall silo with little compartments that are all kind of, and I made it all organic. I took that away from Alien. I loved the fact that the Alien had all that stuff dripping, and Giger has all organic stuff, and he steals from nature shapes, and so I wanted this to be kind of Giger-esque. And but this huge cylinder that I shot, that I get the audience to believe that it's vertical and it's the cylinder. Actually, they only built half of it, only half the circumference of it, and it laid on its side on the floor of the stage. So it went from the ceiling on one side of the stage down to the floor in the middle of the stage and up to the ceiling on the other side of the stage. And then I had a little model so I could keep my mind straight as to where the camera would be if I were looking up at it. I had to keep on saying, I'm looking up at it or over
Yeah.
it.
Well, it totally worked. I had no idea.
Yeah, it was, in fact, the reverses, you know the film. So when he flies out and he's weightless and he's hanging onto that umbilical cord, that's the same set. I'm way up in the rafters now shooting down into it. He's actually hanging down into it. Because the other side
Yeah.
of it is this.
That's a great lesson for directors, which is to kind of, you know, usually it's the French reverse or something like that, but sort of you can control perspective. And it often, I find those are the moments where you're sort of the only one who understands. The whole crew is looking at it going, this is never going to work. This guy's crazy. You know, there's no set here or whatever, you know, like, but you, because you're a director, you kind of have it in your mind, and you really have to kind of lead with force and just say, trust me, this is going to work in the camera, because so many people can't see it. That's why they're not directors. They don't have that other gear where you can just kind of imagine what the camera is going to see only, and the illusion will work there.
Well, I had another experience like that on a film called Second String, which took place about 75%. It was a cable movie for TNT. And about 75% of it takes place in the middle of a football field during playoffs. So it's a stadium full of 60,000 people, and your film takes place in the middle of the 60,000 people. So we're up in Toronto and we're location scouting, and they take me down to the stadium there, and I go, okay, let's just look at this one little section there. How many people sit in that one little square, which will be like a quarter of an inch on your screen? Over 1,000. Okay, so we did crowd replication. It will take us months to do this. So we finally decided to do it on green screen. So then they're gonna hang a green screen around a football field till the cinematographer said, one good wind is gonna turn this into a major sail, you know. So we had to find an indoor soccer indoor soccer field in Toronto, and we hung. It was 50 by 80 by 50, 30 feet high of green material, and so I only had half a field on that as well. So if you're shooting down the middle, all you have to do is switch the people, right? If you're shooting across the field, all you have to do is put the other bench people on that side of the field and just reverse the people. But when you're shooting up and down the field, now you're really screwed, because the other team, I only had one end zone. It had to be both. To make a long story short, I had it all in my head to the point where at one point on one day I went, we're done. We're going home. I can't figure this one out. We'll regroup tomorrow, because I couldn't figure it out. It was like so complicated.
I had a film like that. We did the same thing. We had one house, and it was on the Universal backlot. There's the Littlest Whorehouse and Texas House, and we had to make it look like two identical houses across the street from each other. And so half of the shots were going to be flipped later, and the scriptie just couldn't keep it straight until the very last day. We were doing a shot, and she goes, stop. We're like, what? She goes, shouldn't there be a car in front of that house? And it was like the first time she like cracked the code, and we were like, you're totally right. Like, and she nailed it. So talk to me about, I'm kind of curious, like, you know, you started commercials into movies, MOWs, and then, you're pretty prolific in TV now and pilots. Was there a similarly difficult reinvention there, or were there any other reinventions of your brand or who you were, catch-22s in your career, or kind of did Fire in the Sky give you a blank check for the next 20 years?
I wish. Fire in the Sky had the biggest opening the weekend it opened, except it was open. It hadn't been no sci-fi in the theaters for quite a long time. Spielberg had nothing out there. There were no Star Wars films. So I thought I had a clear run at this, and Paramount was really up on it. So they gave it a wide release. Unfortunately, the weekend it opened was the storm of the century that closed down all movie theaters from Boston to Atlanta, as deep as Chicago. So I still ended up being #1 in the box office with like a gross of about 7 million, without the help of all the theaters in every major eastern southern coast,
Wow.
East Coast city. So no, it didn't give me a free ticket. But what I did do is I did reinvent myself in each of those iterations. Started as a commercial editor, made myself into a commercial director. From commercial directing, I became a TV movie director. From TV movies, I started my feature career. It came to an abrupt halt. I went and regrouped back in commercials. Then someone offered me to do my first pilot. And I did a pilot for a show called Dream Street. I did my first episode ever, which was 30 something. And it had just been done as a pilot. It hadn't been on the air yet. And they were paying me so much to do commercials that they didn't pay me for like 2.5, 3 weeks work on televisions. Is what I made. It's what I made in one day on a television commercial.
Yeah.
So it was not financially interesting to me at all anymore. But my wife at the time said, you should do it. It'd be good for you. So I did this episode of 30 something, which led to this pilot called Dream Street. And that, to show you how naive I was, and I was, after I was done shooting this in New Jersey for whatever it was, freezing my ass off and shooting this pilot, I came back, I edited it, and I went to the agent. I said, well, when does that air? And he went, oh, no, you don't understand. You're up against like 14, 15 other pilots that CBS has done this year, or NBC has done this year, and they'll choose which 2 or 3 they'll put on the air. I went, wait a second, let me get this right. I went and made that piece of film, and there's a chance that nobody's going to see it. Went, no, that's pretty much true. I said, okay, fine. If it doesn't get picked up, don't call me again. All right. I don't need don't call me again. And it got picked up. And then the next one I did was the Young Riders, and that ran for about 3 or 4 years on ABC. And then in the intervening years, I ended up doing 19 pilots, and 16 became TV shows, of which many of them I executive produced. I directed a lot of those. And then eventually, so that was career number 3.
Was there any, I mean, that's a very high hit rate. Was there something you were doing is it just that you were super talented, or did you figure something out that gets a pilot greenlit?
Yeah, I did. It's a real simple formula. I looked at a pilot as a commercial. It was a commercial designed to get 1 person or 2 people to want to get 12 more of them. I was selling a group of 12 more of these shows, and here's a sample. I don't know if you ever heard the joke about the guy who dies and he gets a choice of going to heaven or hell. Did you ever hear that story, Zach?
I don't think so.
Okay, so guy dies and he gets a knock on the door from the Grim Reaper. He said, okay, here's the deal. You can go to heaven or hell. Before you make your decision, let me just show you a little film I have here. And he runs a little piece of film of heaven, and it's a bunch of people playing harps and laying on clouds and so on and so forth. And he runs a thing on hell, and it's a pool party. People are drinking and partying, it was like huge. He said, all right, I'm taking hell. So he gets on the elevator, they descend to hell, the elevator doors open, people are screaming, it's fire and brimstone, they're screaming. He said, wait a second, what was that film? He said, oh, I'm sorry, that was the pilot.
So you became very acutely aware of what the executives were looking for and made sure that it had everything they wanted. Is that what you're saying?
In part, I always brought in a great cinematographer, because at that time, the TVs, DPs or DOPs as we call them, were not particularly gifted. All the televisions looked like NCIS. I hope I'm not offending anybody. But it all looked like CBS programming. And so I would bring in, like, John Toll shot The Young Riders for me. He's won 2 Academy Awards now for River Runs Through It, and for Braveheart and Legends of the Fall.
Heard of those?
And I had to sell him. MGM didn't want him to do it because he hadn't DP'd anything. He was a camera operator, and I went, he's doing it. It's like, let's do it. I'll be there. I'll make sure he does it right. So at any rate, I brought in a really good cinematographer, really good art director, and I always looked at them as movies, not as television. I always would make them look and feel like a movie, because at that time, they were screening them, selling themselves like this big lie, like I just told you the joke. They were screening them on the big screen. They were screening pilots on the big screen, so I would try to make it look like a big screen movie. And it worked. It worked.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So we have a question here about prep, and I know we wanted to talk about sort of your process in prep, because we did our directing for TV workshop about a month ago, and it was super fascinating to see how each of the directors, all veterans, prep completely differently. It's a very personal process. So can you tell us a bit about when you're on a pilot or a TV show and you get that script basically delivered to you without, you don't choose the script, it just kind of gets thrown in your lap. What is your process to make sure that that becomes a success for you, and how has that maybe changed over the years?
I'm going to answer your question. I just want to add one thing, and that is my success rate also had to do with the fact that once the ball was rolling in my favor, once I had sold the first bunch, moving forward, I had the pick of the litter. I could read these
Right.
scripts. That's going to sell. That's not going to sell. That's going to sell. Ooh, that's gonna sell. I'll do that one. So it really helped to be preeminent in that field. So you got the pick of the best scripts to.
Was there anything you learned from the ones that didn't sell? Like, was it just it was the crapshoot, or was there something that happened that maybe you learned from as to why they didn't get picked?
Generally, they just weren't as well written, and even in the ones that I made, one of the important things. But I want to get back to your question, but one of the important things is that the audience understands what they're watching, because when they go to test these pilots, they have a testing system by which people have a meter, and they sit and watch it, and they're being metered every millisecond. You know where they are in the film, and you can tell if they're really enjoying it or they're not enjoying it, or they like that character, they don't like that character. So you got to make sure that the audience is in on the joke and gets it. Otherwise, they won't like it. They get confused and they won't like it. So that was one thing. So getting back to your question about process, the first thing I do, and this is kind of my own trade secret, is when I get a script to read, to direct, I read it very meticulously and very slowly, and sometimes read pages over and over again. It might take me a day, it might take me 2 days to read something that I normally could read in 90 minutes, 2 hours.
And you told me you're stopping as you go. It's not like you just.
I think about it. I try to understand what's going on. I try to anticipate. I examine what I'm thinking about while I'm reading it. What is it making me think about? And the reason for that, Zach, is that for a director, the first time you read a script is the very last time that you're going to see that script for the first time. And once you're into it, it now becomes a job. Now it's days and things and cameras, and now you've read it a million times, and you get lost in the making of it. But the people who are going to come to see it are going to come to see it for the first time. And so you want to be able to dig inside all during the making process of what was it like the first time I saw this, because that's the experience I want to give to the audience. If it was a good experience. If it was a bad experience, I'd want to change it. But so that's the first step. The first step is kind of digesting the script.
And what do you, like specifically, what are you writing down, and how?
I'll make little notes in the margins, but it really is visceral. It's very visceral stuff. It's not intellectual stuff. It's really, it's emotional. It's like, what am I feeling like? What's it making me feel like? I'm anticipating it.
What am I wondering?
Yeah, exactly. So I don't do a lot of note taking. I don't do a lot of a breakdown of characters. I don't do a lot of written work with the scripts. It's mostly I'll do some sketching. I'll do some scrap art. I know I've spent a lot of time picking out fonts. You know, it's like fonts will tell. I did a mini series in Vancouver called Earthsea, and Earthsea was made up of many different worlds. They all existed on different islands. And each world had its own kind of sense of time and space and place. And I tried to define that by naming that island. The names were already in the book. Ursula K. Le Guin wrote the series of books. And, but I would find a font and I would print the name of that island in that font. And I had all these like 12 different fonts. So I knew that that was the Old English village, and this was the serfs, and this was, you know, I do a lot of scrap artwork and look at a lot of photography and look at a lot of scrap art. And then finally, where the rubber really meets the road for me is we go location scouting, and I have already in mind from scrap art and so forth what I'm looking for, and I already have certain photographic needs. I'm always looking for windows and depth. Where's the light coming from? That's question number one. Where's the light coming from? Number two is, how deep can I go? You know, it's like, I don't want to be stuck up against a wall with an actor. I want to have another room there, or hallway, or a window, or something to give the room some kind of depth. And then I was going to show you, I have, before I forced myself to do this, and then I forced everybody who worked for me when I was an EP, all the directors that came on, whether they liked it or not, had to do this too, because it forces you to think out. And that's, I developed a form for shots, a shot list for shot listing. And I had developed it to such a state where it actually had buttons where you could pick the size of the little icon to tell you whether it's a close-up, a medium shot, a wide shot. You know, as I had drawn icons for all these things. I was going to sell this thing at one point, but then Word went and screwed me up by putting that ribbon at the top, and now I can't build macros. Here, I'll show you what some of these. Hold on one second. I'm gonna
Sure.
see if I can find. Hold on. I don't know what I did with it.
Yeah, well, you probably don't know this, but because I shadowed under you and you showed me what you you know, how you did it, and I went on to do something similar of my own using Excel, and then eventually I created a program that does shot listing, that is kind of, you know, inspired by those early conversations you had with me, and it's now used by tens of thousands of people all around the world. So kind of you informed my hunger for shot listing at an early age.
Unfortunately, the reason why I had to reboot was because all that stuff is on a hard drive that my computer sometimes recognizes and sometimes doesn't. I don't want to have to reboot everything now to put it on. But
Well, what are the key things that you track in that shot list? Like, what are the things that matter the most to you there?
okay, it starts like this. I used to put shot number, which would tell me how many shots I was going to do that day. I left that off because I needed the real estate. So the first thing is the scene number. The next thing is day or night. The next thing is page count. The next thing is the scene description. So it'll say Zach and Rob on a Zoom call. And then the next thing, it'll be the shots. That'll be describing the shots. There'll be 2 close-ups, a 2-shot, whatever it's going to be. I'm in a dolly. And then HH stands for handheld. And then there's a thing for special equipment. So if I'm using a Steadicam or a Techno Crane or whatever, I put that in there. And then there's an area for notes. And one of the things that I noticed when I was just looking at it is that as I lay this out, I'm able to lay it out in such a way that it's efficient. It's not just getting, for television, it's not just getting the shots down. It's, do I need all, like first I shot list everything I can think of. And then I think to myself, do I really need that? Oh, I'm actually getting that when I'm here. If I just tighten up over there, I can get that from there. I can get extremely efficient. And by doing that, oftentimes I'll block shoot things. And what I'll do is on this shot list, I will aggregate all the shots in one column and it'll say block these. And we try to just turn the set around twice. So you shooting one way, you shoot both scenes shooting one way, you turn around the set, shoot both scenes going the other way, and then I think you turn around no, you only turn around the once. That's right.
Yeah. Something I learned watching you that kind of blew my young mind.
Oh, your audio went.
Sorry, I hit mute. Something I learned from you that kind of blew my mind when I was in my early 20s, that I then stole and used for the rest of my career, was I was watching you do this scene with 6 characters, and it's kind of obvious now, but at the time it was new to me, so people might find it interesting, was you had your master turn into an over, so that, because you knew they're only going to use the master for the beginning and the end, and so by having one shot turn into the coverage of another shot, you've just saved yourself a whole setup, which has saved yourself half an hour. Is there any other types of things like that that you've learned over the years to be efficient?
Yeah, oftentimes I will, you cut to an actor, he walks into a room, you cut to the POV. So now you got a clean POV of the room. Then the actor enters that POV and I dolly him into an over to the people he's talking to. That's always saved me time. I mean,
yeah, so it's having one shot act as a few shots, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
as long as they're looking the same way.
I mean, you know, the editorial background, you know, that's how I started, was an editor. So from an editorial background, you, you become aware of, why am I shooting full takes of this? They're never going to use this. I mean, like I do an extreme wide shot, like on Eyewitness, we would do these like 10mm establishing, you know, I mean, masters. There'd be two little stick figures in a beautiful scene, gorgeous to look at, but you know you're not going to play it in it. So I would just shoot the beginning and the end of it. Do the first 10 lines, do the second, you know, last 5 lines, and move on.
I remember when I was shadowing you, there was this funny moment where you were behind, and the DP it was two people sitting at a table in a cafe or restaurant or something, and the DP suggested cross shooting them, basically like shoot both of their close-ups at the same time. And you were like, "Is that going to save you any time? I mean, you're going to have to light both sides of the set and keep all the lights out of it." And the DP was like, I got it. And you looked at me and you're like, "Well, I've never ever seen this work before, but if he does it, he's a genius." And it ended up working. I remember there's something I hadn't considered about is it taught me that you have to kind of light a direction and then light it. You know, when I was that young, that was new to me. But I guess this DP had a certain way where he was able to hide all the lights looking both ways.
Well, it's really most DPs are resistant to it because you can't do beautiful lighting on one character while somebody's sitting in the other shot where your light wants to be. So, but there are places, like especially in like traveling shots in a car, where you could do raking 2 shots from both sides of the car and then just tighten them up into singles. And it's great to have both sides of a conversation, because the actors then can do whatever they want. If they go up, if they, you know, but everything's going to match. And so, yeah, that saves so much time. It's crazy.
As long as you and the DP are, you know, on the same page, it's hard to throw that at the DP if he's not into it or he or she's not into it.
Right.
And then the last thing I want to talk about before we just finish up everyone's questions is just talk to me about any more details around navigating human behavior and sort of handling studio heads, handling actors, handling showrunners. Like, the director has like all the control and none of the control. You're given all the control, but you're not in charge in a lot of the cases. And a lot of people don't realize that when they're starting out, because they do short films and things where they can do whatever they want. But really, I've found, and I'm sure you found the same thing, as you go deeper into your career, mostly what you're learning and perfecting is people psychology, not so much the craft of actually shooting. Can you talk to me about the lessons you learned around that?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, in later years, I've been very unsupervised, you know, but I've been putting together a curriculum to teach on a university level, and my thesis is basically entitled "The Psychology of Directing," because there really isn't a course in film school that teaches the psychology. Because I think that you have to have almost as good a grasp of human behavior for behind the camera as you do in getting performances in front of the camera. You have to understand human behavior and the way people operate, and what is the basis that they're making decisions. What's driving their decision making? What's driving? Oftentimes it's going to be ego. It's going to be job security. It's going to have a whole variety of things. But I've always, but there is a psychology in dealing with studio executives, in dealing with your producer, in dealing with on-reactors. On-reactors can be a real difficult problem for a director. I had a actor in EXPANSE, Thomas Jane, who now is a dear friend of mine, but at the time I didn't know him from Adam. I had never seen Hung, and someone reminded me that he was in Boogie Nights, but I didn't remember him in Boogie Nights. And he was like the big star. He was #1 on the call sheet. Day one that I was going to work with him, I came on the set. He wasn't there. It was like a 7 o'clock call. I got there about 6:30. 7 o'clock rolled around. He wasn't there. 7:30 rolled around. He still wasn't there. He came in about 7:45, and he looked like he had slept all night. He was like really hungover and was like really pissed off and just really ornery and angry and just not nice. And I walked in the set. He wouldn't even make eye contact with me. He wouldn't even look at me. And he just said one thing to me. He said, "Why the fuck am I here so early?" And I looked at him and I went, "I don't do the call sheets, Thomas, man. You have to talk to the producers about that. I read my call sheet. I come with them. They tell me to come." And the rest of the day, he was just as nasty a guy as you could ever think of working with. Wouldn't take any direction. If I gave him direction, he would suggest to do the exact opposite of it. If I wanted him to stand by the door, he'd say, "Okay, I'm going to be lying on the couch." And I realized I got to work with this guy now for another 2 weeks. So this is going to be a miserable experience for me. And believe me, my blood pressure and my heart was pounding all day long because it was just confrontation after confrontation. So I decided, I came in the next morning and I told my AD, I said, "Let me know the minute that Thomas Jane comes to his trailer." And they did. And I went to his trailer door and I knocked on the trailer door. He said, "Who's there?" And I told him, and he said, I said, "Could I come in and speak to you for a minute?" He said, "Sure." And I went in and I said, "Thomas, listen, it was apparent to me yesterday that you were an amazingly unhappy human being. I don't know why. I really don't care to know why. But really? I was?" He was like, Mr. Innocent. I went, "Yeah, you were pretty unhappy yesterday, miserable." "Well, I hadn't slept the night before and I was over." I said, "I just wanted to have this conversation with you because I just wanted to share one thought with you. They hired me and I'm here for only one reason." Now, I exaggerated a little bit, but I did say, "I'm only here for one reason, Thomas, and that's to make you feel comfortable. That's all I'm here to do. So you can either partake in that and utilize what I have to give, or tell me you don't want it, and I'll go sit in the corner. But I'm just here to make you feel comfortable." And he was like, "Oh, really? Oh, great." Okay, flash forward 6 weeks. I'm in post-production. I'm walking across the lot. I hear a voice from the other end of the lot, and it's Thomas Jane. He yells out, "Hey, Rob, you're missed."
And what was the insight that you had to go and say that?
The insight was that keep your enemies closer. That's the insight.
Yeah.
Keep your enemies closer. And I learned that a long time ago. And people that you think are the most difficult to work with and that feel the most abrasive to you, those are the people you should go out of your way to embrace and appeal to and make your friend and keep close.
But I think also, like, what was really valuable about that story is you had a private conversation in a moment that didn't have a time crunch.
Right.
Because people often try and have those conversations, blowing up in the middle of the set when the sun's going down, like your AD was with the Finks, and that's the worst time to do it.
Well, I was nominated for the DGC award for an episode which had him and Jared, what's his name? Jared, his father was the actor, Jared Harris. You know who Jared Harris is?
I don't know.
Oh, he's a wonderful actor. He's amazing. His father was Richard Harris.
Yeah.
He was a famous actor. At any rate, they were supposed to do a scene together. Jared Harris is the bad guy. Thomas Jane is the cop, good guy, so on and so forth. So the writers, who were absolutely astounding writers, I mean, really amazing writers. They wrote the first draft of Children of Men.
Wow.
Right? They wrote the first draft of Iron Man. Okay. Spectacular writers. So they had written this as mainly a scene. He gets kidnapped by Jared Harris's character, and it's mainly a scene where he's being interrogated, but it's Thomas's scene. So it's been written that way. And Jared comes to the writers and goes, "I don't like this scene. It's all about Thomas's character. I need it to be more about my character." So they rewrite it. They make it more kind of about, not more about, but they give him more to do. And Thomas Jane comes back to him and goes, "I read the rewrite. Listen, I'm not going to sit on the set and watch this guy work. I'm just not doing it. This was my scene and I want it to be my scene." So the writers came to me and they said, "Should we rewrite it back to the way it was?" And I went, "No, don't. Leave it the way it is. Leave it the way it is. We'll show up in the set. I know I can shoot this in probably 6 hours or 7 hours, and I've got 10. So we'll show up in the morning and we'll put them in the octagon. I'll bring them in, we'll rehearse it. Let them fight between themselves. And so I brought them in, and for like 2.5, 3.5 hours, these guys went at it, and they finally arrived at a balance they liked that got me a nomination.
I think I remember that scene, and it's a really terrific scene.
Thank you.
And so, you know, I've seen you when I was shadowing on Haven. There was a lead actor that it was the first time I'd ever seen this because I hadn't done TV before. But you'd block a scene, and he would always say, "Well, what if I?" And he'd grab a case of beer and walk to the other side of the set where there was no scene. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, the director just said it's this, and then every scene, this guy would say, "Okay, well, I'm going to do the opposite." What are tactics directors can use? And that's like my worst case scenario. That's some of the reason I like working with kids, because they just do whatever you tell them to do. But what are tactics you can use when you're blocking a scene and the actor keeps doing the opposite?
Well, your inclination is to do what I would want to do, which is, you know, just sit damn down where I tell you to and just do your lines. But the guy probably would leave the set, and we'd have to shut down. So you can't do that. So the only way to do it is to, what I did, frankly, is the executive producer of the show was Sean Pillar, who was this guy's best friend. And I went, "Sean, he's not doing it. You go talk to him." Like, that's what I did. Sean was my friend. And I said, "Sean, go talk to your buddy. He's being really ornery, man."
Yeah.
But in most cases, what you try to do is you kind of do a bit of negotiation. I personally lean towards what the actors want to do, because A, it's going to make them feel more comfortable, and B, where I have responsibility and we as directors have responsibility for all the characters, they have responsibility for one character. So all they think is through the eyes of that one person they play. So they know that person better than we know him. So generally, when Thomas Jane would say to me, "I don't think I should be doing this," he was right. I would do what he said, and I would go, "You know what? He's right about that." That would have been a disaster.
Well, that's one of the areas where, even though you've prepped a really specific shot list, you do have to be ready to dance and kind of see it on its feet, and you know, be prepared to do things you hadn't planned. So with the time we have left, I want to just kind of go through people's questions, and anyone else, please write down your questions here. Well, there's a question here: when working off a shot list and you're running out of time on the clock, what are tricks you use to kind of cut and combine shots? When you realize you've got more shots than the sun will allow, what goes through your mind in those moments?
Exactly that. You know, it's like I try to figure out what's the oneer. How can I do this in one? You know, I mean, when you look at contemporary television cinema as done brilliantly on paid cable shows and HBOs and Showtimes and so forth, there are a lot of scenes in those films that are done in just two people sitting and talking. There's no coverage. Networks always want coverage. They always want the close-ups. Give me a close-up. Give me a close-up. But cable shows and streaming services, they're not like that. They want it to look more cinematic. And so you can get away with a lot less close-up work and more. And so I try to figure out, how can I do this in one? How can I pan off of this into another and keep it going? I come up with some really good oneers that get me out of trouble at the end of the day.
One of the other tricks I use that's been really helpful is scheduling the hardest, most important stuff at the beginning of the day, and the easiest cleanup, insert stuff that no one really cares as much about. The scene that is a walk to the next scene, you know, that type of stuff near the end of the day, because that way no one's worried about rushing it. Whereas if you have your most critical emotional scene at the very end, rushing it can really hurt.
Well, you don't want to do that for the actors, and you don't want to do that for yourself. I mean, at the beginning of the day, you know, you have the time and the inclination, and you don't want to carry. I don't want to carry the angst of knowing it's coming up. I want it behind. You know, I want to know we got it in the can. Now we can move forward.
That's why it's really important to sit down with your AD and make sure that the order of scenes is in order of sort of where you want to invest your time. Another great question, just asking, what are some of the best things and worst things about directing for TV? Or there's something that comes to mind of why to do it and what you love and what you hate.
Okay, what I love, these are good questions, easy to answer. What I love about television is that unlike movies and other forms, it's long form. Everything's long form. You know, it's like you have a chance to really invest in characters, especially on the better shows. You have a chance to invest in characters, and characters have always been the mainstay of all my work. I came out of theater, so character work is, without good performances, without good acting, you got nothing. And the worst part of it is Thomas Jane, and the best part of it is Thomas Jane. I mean, it's supervision. I found in the last few years of my career, since like 2016, I'm pretty unsupervised. They used to have a writer from that episode as an executive producer, and then they realized it was too expensive to pay for the writer to be on the set with you all the time. So they didn't send him, and that was the best news. Nobody was watching me. I could do whatever I wanted. You know, it's like we're grown-ups. I know what work has to get done. I know what you're trying to get. We sit through those tone meetings for like endless hours. That is the worst part of doing television. Come to think of it, that is the very worst part of doing television, is tone.
But it is an important meeting, right?
Yeah, but it's an important meeting where the writers get to pontificate for hours and hours, discuss the punctuation, discuss the typeface, discuss, it's like no, it's like, but it's their last chance to actually have real input into the making of this film, so they cherish it and look it.
There's a great question here from Simone about working with second units. What do you look for in a second unit director? How do you figure out what is second unit, what isn't? That's something I haven't really done very much of. What's that like?
Well, second unit by definition is usually a smaller unit that doesn't have any of the vanities with it. It doesn't have hair, makeup, it doesn't have any of your principal actors in it. And that's, for the most part, that's what second unit is. Mostly action, run-bys, establishing shots, the things you don't want to take your A unit and have them all sitting around while you shoot a building or a tree. So you want a talented young guy who wants to deliver really interesting, good footage. I try to supervise that pretty well on my films. Now they tape it, bring it back to me, show it to me before we kind of move on. But interestingly enough, on X-Files, they had a second unit, but their second unit was as big as their first unit. And it was just their way of instead of getting 14 days to shoot each episode, they were getting 18 days to shoot each episode. But the actors would have to run back and forth between sets because they were being used by both. But each of those units, I mean, it was the most expensive TV show in the history of mankind. Each of those, they both had Steadicams, they both had Technocranes, they both had every accoutrement, every toy, everything, both units did. So it really was 2 units shooting the same show.
Yeah, crazy. Interesting question here from Richard. When you do a pilot, when you're doing a pilot, does your deal kind of guarantee you'll have episodes on the show, or that you'll be an EP on the show? Or like, does that deal just sort of just for the pilot, or does it have language about the future of the show?
Well, everything's negotiable, right? So, but traditionally, a pilot director gets paid about 5 times as much money. I used to get paid 5 times as much for the same hour film that the other directors were going to have to do. They would pay me 5 times as much. I eventually was able to become the executive producer on the pilot and got executive producer credit for all the series and got a royalty on every episode of Strong Medicine, ran for 6 years, of Dead Zone, which ran for 7 years. Every episode that got produced, even if I didn't even have to show up anymore, they sent me bucks.
And that's because you're setting the look and tone and feel of the world.
Because that's what they wanted me to sell that pilot for them. So and create the whole thing. That's the thing I didn't like about episodic directing initially, is because I'm used to coming in with a blank canvas. And now I'm walking in, the cast has been decided, the wardrobe's been decided, the locations for the most part have been decided, the crew's been together forever, the
So
Producers
how
are
do
the,
you navigate that? Like, are you there to make their show? Do you find ways of expressing yourself? What's the mix?
yeah, first of all, in the early meetings, I say, well, I'm going to give you everything I have. How much of it do you want? That's my question to them. How much do you want? Because I can deliver the exact show that you're doing right now, or I can do that and add a little bit of myself into it, or I could give you a lot of myself in it. How much do you want of myself? And they'll tell you, we want you, like on 30 something, we want it to be completely yours. That was the last time I ever heard that. And you know, so you go in, and initially, I'll be honest with you, because you're like, you know, everybody caters to you. Yes, sir, boss. Hey, boss, this. Hey, boss, that, and all that for like 12 days or 8 days or 10 days. And then, or usually 7, 8 days. And then some other buddy he's the boss. He's the man, or she's the man, or she's the boss. You know, it's like, and you're like old fish wrap, man. You know, get out of our way. So
I think
I
it
always,
was you who told me you're the only one who isn't coming back next week. So any problems are on you. Even if it wasn't your issue, they all got to work together next week and you won't be around. So if anything went wrong, it's your fault.
absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. So, you know, I mean, I'll tell you what happened for me is for a long time, I couldn't figure out what it was they wanted from me. Because I would look at a series and they would all kind of look the same, but that we want something special. We're going to bring in a new director each episode to bring you something. I didn't understand why they didn't just, like I'm on the shows I executive produced, I tried to just juggle a couple of directors back and forth. But now with, you know, diversity and everything else that's mandatory and should be, you know, you have to give everybody a chance. But
Yeah.
I didn't understand from the look of the show, you can't tell one CSI from another CSI. I'm sorry. They all look like it's one director. Okay. So somebody else, I did Criminal Minds. It's like Criminal Minds. I mean, every Criminal Minds looks like every other Criminal Mind. What am I supposed to do? It's like, I went to do, I don't know if you've ever seen the show, but they have like the
I haven't.
obligatory scene on an airplane where they're flying to the crime. And it's an obligatory scene. It's in everything. They got a standing set. It's pre-lit. They throw one switch. Everybody gets on. And so I walked on that set and I went, okay, here we go. And I looked at the cast and I went, all right, this was episode 700. I said, okay, let me show you how this is done.
That's hilarious. One last great question here I'm really curious about is, you know, the way it's worded here is, do you do you sleep well on Sunday nights? But I'm going to word that to be, are there still moments where you have anxiety? And if so, when and how do you kind of deal with anxiety, you know, even though you've been directing for many decades with every achievement everyone in this room would love to have. Talk to me a bit about anxiety, and is that something that you had that you conquered or you still have?
I still have. I still have. But the way you conquer it is with homework. If you are meticulous about preparation, then you come onto the set confident. You look at what the possible problems will be, what outcome you're looking for. On my very first dramatic film, which was an ABC after school special that I mentioned earlier, I came on the set. It was like I was so excited to be directing dramatic film after having done a couple of years of commercial. And at some point in that day, everything started to fall apart. And when it fell apart, I broke into a flop sweat. And I absolutely went into an anxiety attack, a heavy anxiety attack. And I went home that night and I was like 21, 2 years old. And I said, that can never happen to me again. You can never put yourself in that situation again, which is why I do a shot list for every single day. And I try to look at every eventuality or possible eventuality that could happen that day, because something's going to go wrong that day. Something's going to go wrong. On Table for Five, I was in the Plaka, which is the marketplace of Athens. And I'm shooting with the two leads with John Voight. And we're doing it at sunrise and Vilmos Zsigmond. And I want to do it all as not in one take, but I had multiple cameras set up so the actors could just stroll through these ruins and the next camera would pick them up and the next camera would pick them up. And then we'd go back and cover it. But I would have the basic coverage at sunset. So we would have it at sunrise. And I get out there and I start rehearsing it. It's now dark. It's dark. The sun hasn't come up yet. So it's like maybe 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. And I'm walking with John Voight and he starts talking and he goes, "This isn't a walk and talk. I'm not doing it as a walk and talk." I went, "What? What do you mean you're not doing it as a walk and talk? It's all laid out here. Here comes the sun. You gotta do it." I've laid the whole thing out for months in my head. He said, "No, it's not a walk and talk. I can't do it as a walk and talk." And instead of panicking, we all got together and went, "All right." And I walked, the sun came up. We missed that opportunity. I said, "But the sun is going to set. So we'll come back here 12 hours from now. And where can we shoot it where he's not walking?" And we went and we found another place to shoot this scene. And John Voight was right. And it's probably the best scene in the film. But instead of panicking, when everything just completely fell apart, the writer went back to the hotel and spent the day rewriting it for this other location. Everybody reoriented themselves and got ready to do it at night. And it was a terrific scene. So you got to be a problem solver. That's the main job of a director, problem solver.
Well, I think that's a great place to end it. Rob, this has been incredible. I think it's one of the best ones we've had, and so much valuable wisdom. And I look forward to having you involved in more of these in the future. And we're going to be putting this on directors.ca. So anyone who's here watching right now, please tell other people to check it out on there, where you can see Rob's talk, as well as all the others we've done. We did Aaron Gilbert, the President Braun Studios, just 2 weeks ago. We've done Sean Williamson. We've had amazing directors and producers on the show. So please go check out that stuff and share it and encourage other people to join while we're all locked inside and can learn from each other. And thank you so much, Rob. There's a lot of people in the chat just thanking you. It's been a great thing, and look forward to many more.
It's been a pleasure. I hope everyone enjoyed it. I certainly did. And thanks, Zach. You've been terrific.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. So stay safe, everyone, and stay tuned on Watch DGC on Instagram, Facebook, all the others for our next chat, which will probably be in a few weeks. All right. Thank you, everyone.